Hello, my name is Sophia. I am 32 years old, and I live in a small coastal town called Harbor View. I work as a teacher at the local elementary school, and I enjoy painting landscapes and cooking traditional recipes from around the world. Today, I want to tell you about something incredible that happened to me last year during a very difficult time in my life. It all started in September, when a massive hurricane warning was issued for our region. Everyone was preparing for the storm, boarding up windows and stocking up on supplies. I had lived in Harbor View my entire life and had experienced storms before, but nothing could have prepared me for what was coming. The hurricane hit our town with tremendous force on a Tuesday night. The wind howled like an angry beast, and I huddled in my bathroom, the safest room in my small house, clutching my emergency radio and a photo album of my family. By morning, when it was finally safe to emerge, I discovered that half of my roof had been torn away, and rain had destroyed most of my possessions. My beautiful garden, which I had spent years cultivating, was completely gone. The painting studio I had built in my backyard was nothing but scattered pieces of wood. I stood in the middle of what remained of my living room, rain still dripping through the ceiling, and I cried until I had no tears left. The community center became a temporary shelter for those of us who had lost our homes. I arrived with just one suitcase containing some clothes and my grandmother's old recipe book, which miraculously survived because it was stored in a waterproof container. The shelter was crowded with about 50 people, all looking as shocked and devastated as I felt. On my second day at the shelter, I met an older woman named Eliza, who had also lost everything in the hurricane. Despite being in her 70s and having her home of 40 years destroyed, Eliza had an extraordinary spark of optimism. "Every storm runs out of rain eventually," she told me with a gentle smile as she shared her packet of cookies with a group of children. Her kindness, despite her own loss, touched me deeply. That night, I couldn't sleep as I listened to the soft crying of a young mother in the cot next to mine. Her two small children had finally fallen asleep, but she was clearly overwhelmed by their situation. In the morning, I introduced myself and learned her name was Maria, and her children were Lucas, age 6, and Emma, age 4. Maria confessed that she was worried about her children falling behind in school while the elementary school was closed for repairs. Being a teacher, I immediately offered to help. "Perhaps we could start some informal lessons here at the shelter," I suggested. "I'm sure there are other children who could benefit too." Maria's face brightened at the idea, and we began to plan. I spoke with the shelter coordinator, a kind man named Tom, who enthusiastically supported the idea and offered to clear a corner of the main room for our makeshift classroom. Word spread quickly, and by lunchtime, 12 children had signed up for lessons. I had no teaching materials, but I was determined to make it work. Eliza heard about our plan and approached me with a tote bag. "I was a librarian for 40 years," she explained. "I always carry some books with me, even during evacuations. Old habits die hard." She emptied her bag to reveal 5 children's books in remarkably good condition. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The next morning, I began our first class with the children sitting in a circle on blankets. Using Eliza's books and my creativity, I taught basic math using small objects we found around the shelter, and we practiced reading and storytelling. The children were eager to learn, and their energy was contagious. Other adults at the shelter began to take notice and offered to help in various ways. Robert, who had been a carpenter, helped us build a small bookshelf from salvaged wood. Jennifer, an artist, drew educational posters on cardboard boxes. Even Maria, who had initially been too distressed to do much, began leading songs and movement activities with the younger children. As news of our shelter school spread through town, donations of books, pencils, and paper began to arrive. A week after the hurricane, our little corner had transformed into a vibrant learning space that brought a sense of normalcy and purpose to everyone at the shelter. The local newspaper sent a reporter to write a story about our initiative. When the article was published, complete with photos of our classroom corner, we received an unexpected visit from the superintendent of schools. Dr. Larson arrived with boxes of school supplies and an interesting proposition. Our district office building survived the hurricane with minimal damage, she explained. But 2 of our 5 schools, including yours, Sophia, will take months to rebuild. We're looking for alternative locations to resume classes, and your shelter school has inspired an idea. Dr. Larson proposed converting part of the district office building into temporary classrooms until the schools could be rebuilt. She asked if I would help coordinate this effort, given the leadership I'd shown at the shelter. I was surprised and honored by her request. "But what about my regular teaching position?" I asked. "Consider this a special assignment," she replied. "We need innovative thinkers to help our community recover." The next few weeks were incredibly busy as we worked to transform office spaces into suitable classrooms. I discovered organizational skills I never knew I had as I coordinated volunteers, arranged furniture donations, and helped develop modified curriculums for our unusual circumstances. Eliza became my right-hand person, using her librarian expertise to establish a lending library of donated books. By early October, our temporary school was ready to welcome students. The first day was chaotic but wonderful, with over 200 children from across the district attending classes in converted conference rooms and offices. Parents were grateful to have their children back in school, and many volunteered their time to help with lunches, playground supervision, and after-school activities. As the weeks passed, I noticed something remarkable happening. Our makeshift school, born out of necessity, was actually thriving in ways our traditional schools hadn't. The unusual circumstances had forced us to be creative with our teaching methods. Without full access to standard textbooks and materials, we incorporated more hands-on learning, community service projects, and real-world problem-solving into our curriculum. Students who had previously struggled in traditional classroom settings were suddenly engaging and excelling. One such student was Dylan, a 10-year-old boy who had always been labeled as having behavior problems. In our new environment, where we used hurricane recovery projects as teaching tools, Dylan emerged as a natural leader with brilliant ideas for community improvement. One day, he suggested that the class design a better emergency shelter layout based on what they had learned from their own experiences. His design was so practical that the town emergency management team actually implemented some of his ideas in their revised disaster plan. As October turned to November, the community's recovery efforts continued, though many families, including mine, still had no permanent home. I was staying with a colleague who had a spare room, but I missed having my own space. Yet strangely, despite the continued hardship, I found myself feeling more fulfilled than I had in years. The disaster had revealed a sense of purpose and connection that had been missing in my life. In late November, Dr. Larson called a meeting with the teachers at our temporary school. The repairs to the main school buildings are progressing faster than expected, she announced. We should be able to move back after the winter break. While this was good news, I felt an unexpected pang of sadness. Our makeshift school had become something special, and I wasn't ready to abandon the innovative approaches we'd developed out of necessity. After the meeting, I shared my concerns with Dr. Larson. To my surprise, she had been thinking along the same lines. What if we didn't go back to exactly the way things were? She proposed. What if we took the lessons we've learned here and created something new? That conversation was the beginning of the Harborview Educational Innovation Project. Dr. Larson asked me to lead a committee to redesign our approach to education based on what we had learned during the crisis. The school board approved our proposal in December, providing funding to implement our ideas when the renovated schools reopened. Christmas at the shelter was a bittersweet experience. Many families had returned to repaired homes or found new housing, but about 20 people, including Eliza, were still displaced. The community rallied together to make the holiday special, with local businesses donating decorations, gifts, and a feast. I used my grandmother's recipe book to bake traditional cookies, and Eliza organized a storytelling evening where everyone shared holiday memories from their childhoods. On New Year's Eve, I received incredible news. The insurance money for my house had finally come through, and I could begin rebuilding. Even better, a local contractor offered discounted services to hurricane victims and could start on my house in February. For the first time in months, I could see a clear path forward. The temporary school reopened after winter break with renewed energy. Our innovation committee had been working throughout the holidays, and we were eager to implement some of our ideas before moving back to the regular school buildings. We introduced community connection days where local professionals taught practical skills to students. We established multi-age learning groups for certain subjects, allowing older students to mentor younger ones. We even created a student council that had real input into school decisions. By March, reconstruction of my house was well underway. I had decided to rebuild with some changes. My new home would be smaller, but more efficient, with a larger studio space for my painting. The hurricane had taught me what was truly important, and accumulating possessions was no longer my priority. I wanted space for creativity and for hosting community gatherings. In April, almost 7 months after the hurricane, our regular school buildings reopened, but they weren't exactly regular anymore. Many of our innovations had been incorporated into the renovated spaces. Classrooms were more flexible, with movable furniture and areas designed for different types of learning activities. We had a new community partnership program that brought local experts into classrooms regularly. Most significantly, we had a completely new approach to teaching that emphasized real-world problem-solving and student initiative. By May, I was able to move into my newly rebuilt house. The first thing I did was invite Eliza, Maria, and her children, and other friends from the shelter for a housewarming dinner. Using recipes from my grandmother's book, I prepared dishes that represented healing and new beginnings. As we sat around my new dining table, Eliza raised her glass in a toast. To Sophia, who taught us that sometimes we don't just rebuild what was lost, we build something better. Those words touched me deeply because they captured exactly how I felt about the past 8 months. The hurricane had taken away my home and possessions, but it had given me something far more valuable, a sense of purpose and community that I had never experienced before. In June, I received another surprise when Dr. Larson offered me a new position as the district's Director of Educational Innovation. "What you started in that shelter has transformed our entire school system," she told me. "We need your vision to continue guiding us forward." I accepted the position with both excitement and a touch of nervousness. It was a big step up from classroom teaching, but I felt ready for the challenge. 1 year after the hurricane, our town held a commemoration ceremony. Rather than focusing solely on what had been lost, the event celebrated how our community had come together and grown stronger. A documentary filmmaker had been recording our recovery process, and the premiere of her film was the highlight of the ceremony. Seeing our journey displayed on screen, from the desperate days immediately after the storm to the innovative recovery initiatives, was incredibly moving. The film featured our shelter school prominently, with interviews of children and parents describing how it had provided stability during chaos. After the screening, many people approached me with stories of how our educational innovations had positively impacted their children. One mother told me her daughter, who had previously hated school, now couldn't wait to attend each day. A father shared that his son was now considering becoming a teacher because of the mentoring program we had established. These testimonials confirmed that something truly valuable had emerged from our disaster response. 2 years after the hurricane, our approach to education gained national attention. Educational researchers came to study our methods, and I was invited to speak at conferences about crisis-inspired innovation. The Harborview Educational Innovation Project became a model for other districts interested in more engaged, community-connected learning. Eliza, now a dear friend, often accompanied me to these speaking engagements, sharing her perspective on how intergenerational connections had strengthened our recovery. My rebuilt house became a gathering place for community events and planning sessions. The garden I replanted was different from my original one, more collaborative, with sections contributed by various community members. I had built a large covered patio where I hosted regular community dinners, continuing the tradition that had started in the shelter. My painting also evolved, reflecting my changed perspective. Before the hurricane, I had painted serene landscapes, undisturbed by human presence. Now, my canvases filled with scenes of community, people working together, children learning in unconventional spaces, hands joined in purpose. 3 years later, I found myself reflecting on how completely my life had transformed. Before the hurricane, I had been a dedicated but somewhat conventional teacher, living a relatively isolated life despite being surrounded by students each day. The disaster had pushed me into deeper connections with my community and awakened leadership abilities I hadn't known I possessed. When new families moved to Harborview, I often shared my story with them, explaining how our innovative schools and strong community bonds had emerged from disaster. Many were surprised to learn that what they saw as the town's greatest strengths had been born from its most challenging moment. 5 years after the hurricane, I published a book about educational resilience, documenting how crisis response can lead to positive institutional change. The book included stories from students, parents, and teachers, creating a mosaic of perspectives on our collective journey. The proceeds from the book funded scholarships for Harborview students pursuing careers in education or emergency management. Eliza, now in her 80s but still sharp as ever, wrote the foreword, her words capturing the essence of what we had learned. True education happens when we transform challenges into opportunities for growth. The hurricane taught our community that lesson more effectively than any textbook ever could. Today, as I look out from my porch at the rebuilt town of Harborview, I can still see subtle signs of the hurricane's passage. Certain trees that grow at odd angles, architectural choices in newer buildings designed to withstand future storms, a community that instinctively pulls together at the first sign of trouble. But I also see tremendous beauty and resilience everywhere. Our schools are thriving with engaged students and innovative programs. Our community centers serve as hubs for intergenerational activities and mutual support. Most importantly, there's a prevailing attitude that difficulties are temporary, but the connections and wisdom gained through overcoming them are permanent. Last week, a young teacher who had just moved to town asked me how I had managed to stay positive during the worst of the crisis. The question made me reflect deeply. I wasn't always positive, I admitted. There were dark days when I felt completely overwhelmed by loss. But each small step forward, teaching those first lessons in the shelter, seeing children smile despite their circumstances, witnessing the generosity of neighbors, gave me just enough hope to take the next step. Eventually, those steps led somewhere remarkable. Sometimes I wonder what my life would have been like if the hurricane had never happened. I would still have my original house and possessions. I would probably still be teaching in my familiar classroom. My life would be comfortable and predictable, but I wouldn't have discovered my capacity for leadership or innovation. I wouldn't have formed such deep bonds with people like Eliza and Maria. I wouldn't have witnessed the extraordinary resilience of children adapting to challenging circumstances. I wouldn't have written a book, or spoken at conferences, or influenced educational practices beyond my classroom. When new disasters strike other communities, our town often sends teams to help, sharing the lessons we learned about effective recovery. I usually join these teams, bringing both practical assistance and the message that devastation can sometimes be the clearing ground for transformation. The hurricane taught me that resilience isn't just about rebuilding what was lost. It's about having the courage to envision and create something better. I keep a small piece of debris from my original house displayed on my mantle, a constant reminder of how completely life can change in a single moment, and how humans have the remarkable capacity to find meaning and purpose, even in the most difficult circumstances. My name is Sophia, and that was my story about finding hope during difficult times. If you are faced with losing everything, what unexpected opportunities might you discover in the process of rebuilding? Thank you for listening to my journey from devastation to renewal. And remember that sometimes our greatest growth comes from our most challenging experiences.